Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Bryan Lemke.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Bryan Lemke, joined by Mike and JJ Ducart. Today we got a cool podcast lined up. We're going to be talking about target bucks, and not just target bucks, but what it takes to hunt just really one specific buck. You know, a lot of us as hunters have different strategies, different goals, and a lot of us here, when we set those goals, will pass up deer for long periods of time, try to manage these deer, and we might be hunting a deer for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, to get them to that upper age structure and, then harvest them at a certain point. And then, when it comes down to, okay, that's the target buck, what does it take to, focus in and only hunt really one deer for that entire season or multiple seasons? So, JJ, I'll kick this over to you to kind of start with. You have hunted lots of deer, so have you, Mike, and had just one target buck for a year or several years. You guys are managing your whitetail from scratch property now, and a lot of times you don't have a ton of target bucks. Talk to me about what that's like and just that overall strategy year to year.
Well, first, if anybody's watching, I think we should probably talk about this giant rack sitting in front of me. So maybe Bryan can break that down a little bit, but yeah, he's had some great success this year on target bucks, and this being number 2. So maybe you talk about this buck a little bit, and then we'll dive into that.
Yeah, you're on a roll, man. Look at I come walking in the studio, and the thing is, whenever you look at a deer from behind when they're walking away, how massive they look. Well, this one here from behind looks huge. The mass it is pretty cool, man. You're on a hot streak.
Yeah, you take it when you can get it. I've had a lot of people say, a dream season, and you're having quite a year. I shot a big one, my target buck in Minnesota that I had been watching for a few years, and then this one had the opportunity to go down to Iowa during their first shotgun season and shoot this one, which ends up being even bigger than the one I shot in Minnesota, the biggest buck of my life. Very fortunate, but you look at this and. Yeah, I'm having a dream season, and you kind of get a hot streak every once in a while. But like there was a stretch I can remember just a few years ago. I didn't shoot a buck, I think, for 5 years or 6 years. And it comes down to being patient, and waiting for the right stuff. And sometimes there's obviously a little luck involved around what we do. Put a lot of time and effort into it. But this deer right here, pretty special one. Was hunting with some friends down there, and they also own Big Buck Down Outfitters. But they knew this deer pretty well, watched him all year. Some other hunters actually had encounters with him and had the opportunity to chase him. And this is a good example of, it was a shorter window for me down there. I didn't have a lot to do with the past years of history with this deer, but there were some other good deer on this farm too. And it was like, for me, it was going to be this deer or nothing. So when I went down there with that mindset of, this is the one, and I was okay with going home with the tag in my pocket too. So, this deer, super cool buck, big inline tine, super massive. Shot him on the evening of the second day of the hunt, and just came cruising along. Basically a big CRP field. It was a transition area from bedding to destination food. Came cruising along a creek bottom, and that was kind of all she wrote, but pretty fortunate. Definitely a buck of a lifetime. I've had a dream season, I guess, if you will, and I'm just fortunate for each buck for what it is. Not combining them because I want to do them each justice. I appreciate them for different reasons, and just lucky to be able to be the hunter behind that deer.
Pretty big deer.
Pretty big deer.
Yeah, what'd you say is in the 180s? Real big buck. And 6x6.
Yeah, we rough scored him at 184. It's crazy. He looks, all the reveal videos and pictures they had of him. He's actually kind of like a 6x7. You look at him one way and you go, man, that deer could be, 160s, great deer either way. And then you look at him and he turns and he shows off all of what he's got, and you're like, man, he could be 200.
Yeah, that's what I kind of said. Did I hit 200? Because I saw the pictures afterwards,
Yep. Yeah, he was. We rough scored him. Nothing official, but rough scored him at 184. Super massive. He does have his beams aren't very long. They're kind of a little deceiving. This right beam I think was only 18 and a half inches, but obviously carries his mass. He's got tine length. Some extras there. So, the 180 mark to hit that kind of twice in 1 year is pretty special. But, it's the strategy, it's the chase. It's way more than just the score for me. I mean, I love shooting big scoring deer and big mature bucks, but it's everything that goes into it. It's the memories of, him coming out and Connor filming him. It was kind of cool because we were watching some deer off to our right, and we were in an elevated ghillie blind. It was a platform, and it was a ghillie blind up on that platform. Watching some deer to the right, and Connor, who was filming me, just happened to look back down to the left, and I was turned all the way around looking at some other deer. And he's like, here comes a buck. There he is. And he's coming through this tall CRP. So at some point you could see him, some point you couldn't. And I'm like, Connor, where is he? He's like, he's right there. And I'm looking out the window, and he's trying to point. I'm like, I don't see him. Where is he? And, he's calm, cool, and collected over there. I was getting pretty razzed up at this point. But that deer's coming through, and finally he's like, he's right there. And I looked, and just the way that window sat where my chair was in the blind, I couldn't see him, so I kind of had to peek over. And once I peeked over to the left, I saw him clear as day there, and just all came together after that.
Cool story.
Well, every buck has an interesting story. I'm sure that you'll never know. How many people passed this one up? Did somebody miss it? You said the neighbors were hunting him pretty hard. There's so many things a buck has to go through. Hard winters, disease, EHD down there going on.
Oh, yeah.
CWD in areas, which everybody can argue how much that really impacts deer. But, they all got a story. So I'm sure this buck had one. And I'm sure there's some hunter out there that was wondering where he went, or wish they could put his tag on him. But that's kind of, I feel like that's, every big buck, every target buck. If we're gonna dive into target bucks, every target buck seems to have that same story where, you end up shooting him or somebody else shoots him, you're the one passing him. It's just kind of wild how it all works, and I think it makes it that much more satisfying when you actually can wrap a tag around these deer, because it's like 1 out of 100. I was trying to think yesterday. I was like, target bucks, like what? So we're probably talking 5.5 older. That's kind of generally what we're looking for.
Yeah.
It could be 4-year-old, could be. So that changes a little bit, but how many deer die or get shot out of a big group of bucks in order to get one target buck? Is it 99 out of 100?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah,
it could be higher than that.
I don't know that. I'm saying JJ's a little bit on the glass half empty side today because he's on a dry run on this season.
I don't know. We got, how many 4-year-olds do we have going on the season? We had 6 to 8 in that one spot. Now there's 2 left. So that's just the 4-year-olds. But then how many 3-year-olds before that got shot?
Well, I would say you're accurate. You're accurate on the last
actual surviving 5-year-old. I bet it's 1 out of 100.
Well, I don't know if it's quite that, but if you look at what we've experienced, I can see where he's coming from, because if you look back, I'm just going to go back 5 years because that's our number, okay, a 5.5-year-old deer. So if we go back 5 years, how many target bucks have we been after? You'd have to look for that number, and it's a lot. I mean, there's no way I can just, in the back of my mind, think about, okay, well, there's this one, that one, and start counting them. You can't. There's too many to do that, okay? Now, I'm talking, probably 2.5 to 3.5-year-olds when you really identify if this guy's going to be the real deal or not. So if you got a 2.5-year-old 8-point basket, you're not paying a whole lot of attention to him unless there's something, crazy about it when he turns 3.5. And that typically doesn't, it does happen, but it's not something that you really look at. But those ones that are in the 10-point range, you take a good look at those. And if you go back 5.5 years, we have taken 3 out of how many deer? And it's got to be close to 40, maybe? I know, I'd have to do a count. So, we can throw numbers at that. JJ's saying 100 to 1. I think it's because he's on, we've had such a bad streak these last 2 years. We've probably had I don't know, 6 to 8 potential shooters, even more than that, actually, if you count the 3.5-year-olds. But it's been a lot over the last 3 years, and we've taken one. And that's brutal.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And some of it's winter. Some of it's the neighbor, getting it, or the gun season is during the rut in Minnesota. That really, really hurts us in Minnesota. And then others, they move off. They can't sustain the same property because they're just too aggressive. So you could actually have a higher scoring deer get pushed up because you have a crappier, stronger, more, bully, beefy, buck that doesn't score as well. So there's just so much that goes into it. And there's such an elation when you do get that target buck, when you've watched it for all those years. And then there's, I would say, more disappointment, to be honest with you. There's more disappointment if you decide that I'm a target buck kind of guy and you set a goal of a specific age. You're going to be disappointed way more than you're going to be fulfilled. There's no doubt about that. And is that the right word, disappointed? I don't know.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but like, you're not going to get them way more times than you get them, right? Like, yeah. I think there's a lot of fulfillment in the chase, in watching him and getting to that. Let's face it, like we see, I think these days with social media, we see so many people shooting big deer because it's easy to see and people are posting it and it's that information's accessible. But when you talk about a buck of a lifetime, something like this, like most hunters are never going to see, let alone shoot, a deer like this. And I don't mean to say that arrogantly. It's not arrogant. It's just like I look at it. I'm 34 years old. I've been hunting since I was 12. And truly, I dreamed of a buck like this. Now, fortunate somehow, I would have believed it at the beginning of the year that I was going to shoot 2 like this year. But like, I've been hunting for a long time and had a lot of good opportunities in good places and try to put so much strategy and effort into it. And, still it's not like there's so many, you brought it up earlier, there's so many variables, whether it's disease, whether it's hunters, whether it's cars, like weather, anything. I mean, there's so many variables that are against you. So I think that's where the disappointment, like you talk, comes from a little bit. Like, I don't know if it's disappointment, but it's, you're going to have a lot more failures chasing a deer like this than you will successes when it comes to, I think, harvesting him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think I still think 1 out of 100, but I think maybe that, if you're just looking at 4 or 5-year-old nice buck, maybe it's not 1 out of 100, but like a buck like this. We don't see bucks like this. Oh, I bet it's more.
If you're talking like the deer you guys shoot, I'm not in that world, so I don't really understand that quite yet. But I don't know, 6.5, 8.5. If you're talking that age, oh gosh, yeah, it's got to be close to 1 in 100, I would think. Now, a lot of that has to do with, okay, so you see people on social media, and they're like, oh yeah, these blah, 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 and they get upset because people shoot big deer. And I think a lot of that can be a little bit of the disappointment that we're talking about, or the approach that they have is different than our approach. And so it can be a turnoff to people. And, that's not fair, And so if you're one of those people that get upset about something like that, you should, put yourself in the other person's shoes. And the same thing with like people that do go after these big target bucks. And there's people that target bucks way bigger than what I target. I can tell you that much. And you shouldn't get upset if the neighbor shoots it, and he's out there, if it's brown as down and, gut shot 3 of your deer the year before. I mean, that's the game, man. Yep. Or if you lose deer in other ways. You can't make it a personal thing against a person. I can't preach that enough. And I'll tell you what, it's so hard not to get frustrated or upset because deer hunting isn't a competition sport, but people get super competitive for some reason. I don't know why, because I'm not competitive at all. If I see somebody shoot a big deer, I am just so happy for them. But I'm at a different age too. I've gone through the part where I used to get really revved up and upset if somebody screwed me up or shot my deer, I wasn't upset at the person. I was just upset that, God, he's gone, and almost had a kind of a, you didn't deserve the deer type of attitude. And that's way off track, man. That's way off track. You can't do that. You can't be that way. But, and I don't want to get into a big debate or anything about this and make it, that kind of a podcast. Maybe we can start shifting into strategy on what we do.
Yeah, and I think when it comes down to it, like you look at these big deer on social and there's people that look at the person, right? In reality, it's not about the person or the hunter. It is a little bit, but it's about the deer. Like that's what it's about. It's about showcasing that deer, their life. Like that's the first thing that I thought when I picked up that deer. Excuse me. I know when I picked up a Minnesota deer, same thing, every deer. If this deer could talk right now, like imagine what its life was. Like we obsess over that, thinking about these target bucks and like what they do and how they move, and year after year, just all those different things. We obsess over it. They live their life. And if you could just like somehow understand, go back and hold those horns and like warp into this world where you could see all that, how cool would that be? But it's about the deer. And we get so, I think as hunters and whatever, like get so caught up in, oh, the hunter did this or did it that way or this way, and I couldn't. It's not about that. Like at this point, look, the deer's dead. Like let's celebrate him for what he is and appreciate it, no matter if it's me, you, whoever it is.
Right.
That's what really it's all about.
And I'm going to add something to that. And I don't think a lot of people really understand, where we're coming from. If you look at the inception of actually basically the company Illusion that I started and the Deer Society that we kind of created out of default based off of information we wanted to share, not one thing has ever been about a specific person, or I'm going to say me. I never made anything about me. And that concept or that element stuck through with every single thing we do. If you look at all of our not podcasts, but all of our videos that we've done and everything else, it's not about JJ shot the big, JJ shoots another big, and JJ does this, and Bryan shoots it. It's never ever been that way. So you see the name of the deer. We name the deer, and it's always about the deer. And it's always about trying to help others be successful in the field. That's the core of everything that we've ever done. And I think people like that. That's what made us go viral. I'm being a little, cocky there saying that we're viral, but, we have a pretty decent following. There's a lot of people that do, watch or have heard or use our stuff and our products. And I think it's really appealing that way. So if you take that and you can embrace that thought process, exactly what you just got done saying, it's about the deer, it's about the hunt, it's not a competition. And I know it's hard, because if you don't get disappointed or if you don't even get a little angry sometimes, then you probably don't really have the passion and don't really care. It's just a matter of how you harness that and how you learn from it and how it builds you as a hunter, dealing with those situations. Like JJ said, 100 to 1 if you're going for a big boy.
Yeah, and like you said, if you don't care and you're not passionate, then you're probably not very successful either, whether it's deer hunting or something else.
That's a good point.
Because it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of thought and strategy to get one of these big boys down. But what are some of the common elements that all really big target bucks have?
It's a good question.
I got a couple thoughts, see what you guys think.
Yeah, I'm trying to process that a little bit.
Yeah, I think I think all these deer are different. I think, again, I think it goes back to a lot of variables in different spots. So how much pressure are they getting? Like there's deer that live on big private, pieces of ground that really don't get touched and don't get pressured. So I think those deer maybe could act differently than, excuse me, a big deer that, and they're still out there in urban areas or high pressured areas. You see big deer get shot in both of those scenarios. So I could tell you what I think the differences are a lot more than what I think the common things are. I think one of the most common things is obviously these deer, they get big for a reason. You hear it, it's cliche, but they know how to survive, whether they're in a high pressured area or low pressured area, whatever it is. I think that they, one, they know where safety is, right? They have a core area that's safe, and they have cover, and they know how to hide and not be present or shown at the right times. I do think one thing though, and this is a tactic that I use a lot, is these deer, when they find those areas or they find things that they do year after year, whether it be where the first doe is going to come in and where they take them to breed them, where they will change their pattern to, coming out of the summer or moving into the pre-rut or even after that late season. I think these big deer, these mature bucks, they've lived it year after year and they've understood that they're safe. So watching those historical patterns can be a great way to try to figure out what those deer are going to do, especially if you're hunting them year after year. Like, I feel like they figure out how to survive and they stick to those guns. So really, I would say one of the most common things to watch out for is just like, look back. If you can figure out what they did for the last 2-3 years, it's worked for them, they're probably going to do that again.
I got to agree with a lot of that too. And I would say kind of what you did, it's like every deer has its own personality, but I think one common thing, and this is a general statement, is that when deer get older, like older deer, I'm talking, it starts at 5.5, but then as it gets to 6.5, 7.5, and 8.5, there's a real consistency that I've kind of seen, and that they just totally get way smarter. And that's kind of what you were saying, but they get super smart. I mean, they've had the experiences, they know what to do, they know what not to do. They picked up on things and created a behavior of, like make sure the smaller buck goes out first, hang out on the edge of the timber, don't come. They get very nocturnal. They can disappear for an entire season. Some deer won't even walk around cameras. They could be on your property and you have no idea. And so the old adage that you can't shoot a 200-inch buck if you don't have a 200-inch buck, that there's just that. I mean, that's just common sense. It's just the truth. So then you get back to other philosophy. Well, are you managing deer? Are you letting deer go? How do you know? I know we've hunted places that I would say over 90% of the people that hunt that area have no clue or had no clue there was these huge bucks there because they don't see them. They didn't know they were there. They're not walking around during the daylight. They're not out doing what a 2.5 and a 3.5-year-old do during the rut. They're not out just chasing deer with their head down. They don't do that either because different things change. So I could go on for a while here now, so I don't know where you want to cut me off. Just let me know. But if you're looking at and I'm going to say 200-inch deer, and I don't want to say that because I could go off on a whole nother tangent on that because there was a post, and I hate these kinds of posts. It's a clickbait thing. They said smaller rack deer are just as smart, or small scoring deer are just as smart as giant scoring deer, or smarter, or something like that. I don't know, but it really ticked me off because all they're doing is trying to create this battle amongst each other of hunters, and I just hate that stuff. But anyway, the debate started going on about everybody's in thinking, oh yeah, 2.5, 3.5-year-old deer. No way they're as smart as a 5.5, 6.5-year-old deer, because they're not going to go out and do that stuff. So that's where the debate came. But anyway, scoring deer does have nothing to do with it because you've shot a deer, JJ, that was 8.5 years old, one of the toughest hunts and things that he's gone after. And then he shot another deer. It's different behavior. That deer actually disappeared for a whole year before we harvested him. And you shot him off the ground downwind. We were testing phase out, and he scored way more. In fact, most of your deer scored more than that 8.5-year-old, but that was, I'm not going to say it was your prized possession, but definitely one of his top deer he's ever harvested. Had nothing to do with the score. So intelligence of the deer I think drives us, me, I know him for sure, but the intelligence of the deer drives you more than anything. Yeah. You know what I mean? Now, the score of the deer will probably excite you more than anything, you know, but they go through a transition too. I mean, some of them, okay, I'm just going to start out with, and stop me when you want to go to a certain direction on this conversation, but let's start out with I'm going to go to 4.5 years old, because when we first started really targeting bucks, we would target 4.5-year-old bucks, because to us, a 2.5-year-old was so easy to shoot, and a 3.5-year-old, and we shot a lot of them too. But a 3.5-year-old deer became pretty easy. It was kind of consistent every year we were going to get a 3.5-year-old deer. You know what I mean? But then when they got 4.5 years old, they seemed to get a little savvier. But those are the ones that they start that 4.5-year-old, they have a higher chance of survival rate because they're not doing the stupid blind doe follow. Once they hit 4.5, and this is just things that I've noticed, once they hit 4.5, they start to lock on does and they start to kind of understand what's going on around them. Even though the rut is kind of driving them crazy, they'll still stay nocturnal. They'll still lay back. They're not going to just go out and run randomly wild all day during the daylight hours. They're still, they start getting smarter, okay? Now, they're very killable because I think they're very patternable at 4.5 years old, you know, because they go back. And that goes back to what you're saying. They learn where they're safe. They learn well, that 4.5 years is when they start to think that way. Hey, this is safe. I'm going to check this. And you start to see a real consistent behavior. And so with today's technology, you can start to track that. You know, that this deer's doing this on this wind, on that wind, on that wind, on that wind. And you can really get after them 4.5-year-olds and be very successful. Okay. And then you go to 5.5 years old. 5.5 years old, they get even smarter. Now they're not coming out until right before the daylight. And that's if they're super comfortable. Remember, now they've learned these areas where they feel they're comfortable. If they're super comfortable, they'll start to come out on the edge of the daylight. They're not going to run during the middle of the day consistently at all. Now, if they're on an actual hot doe that's dripping, you know, that goes out the window a little bit, but that's not very long. You know what I mean? And that's just the one little time slot during that particular day, too. So their behavior changes to more being with the doe. And they become, in most places, a 5.5-year-old deer becomes more of the dominant buck. And so the does tend to be selecting them a little bit more than a younger buck where they got to go chase and just try and get some. So the dynamics of their situation is changing, okay? Now the does are receptive to them. And they're not going to go chase the first doe, estrus doe, that it's like it's her first year. You know, I don't know if they come in at 2.5. I'm not a scientist on that, or 1.5 years old. When they're breedable, maybe you guys can chime in on that, but they're not going to chase them does at all. They're going for the seasoned doe because they're more of the dominant buck on the property, and most likely that seasoned doe knows it, and she's probably going to go to him. So he doesn't have to chase near as much. Now you get to 6.5 years old, even more dominant. Now they're driving off the 4.5-year-olds that think they're tough, and they kind of carve out their territory. So now they don't have to go look for that safety territory because they own it. Okay? So that's another thing that's going. Now, how long do I want to go on here, and when do you want to jump in on a different topic of this?
Whenever you want.
Okay, so 6.5, we've noticed that. That's usually about it. You're not going to, it's rare that you're going to run into 7.5 and 8.5-year-old deer and 9.5-year-old deer. I've only seen once in my life, in my entire life. So that we've documented. And I was blown away at that. That deer looked like he was a Brahma bull. It was amazing, the size of that deer. All right, so where are we at? We're at 7.5 or 6.5?
Yeah, you just kind of came out of 6.5.
Okay, came out of 6. Now we're going to 7.5. So now 7.5, they change everything. Now they probably shouldn't be alive. And all the deer there, the genetic superior being, they lay their scent out. You can smell those deer coming to you. I mean, they stink so bad. They take over a property and they are just a beast. Now, that deer, physically, size-wise, it doesn't matter what his rack is probably going to kick the crap out of any deer that comes anywhere near his territory. So if he's carved out that area that he knows is safe, and he's been doing it for years and years and years, and now he's basically, upper middle-age deer. Actually, he's an old deer, almost a grandpa that's not going to take any crap from anybody, an old salty war veteran. He actually exposes himself more like an bull elk. We watched it. And that's where we learned that language. You learn that language with Rod White down in we didn't even know deer did this. But they go out there and they do that big, growly, long breeding grunt that just goes almost like an elk bugling, and it goes on for at least 13 seconds. It's just the most crazy thing. If you heard it out there, you'd think it'd be Bigfoot. Never heard of it, didn't even know it existed. And Ross, no, yeah. And then JJ captures it on film. And it was crazy. What do we call that? The croaker. So we call that croaker, or croaking. We name, they kind of name that. And so now you're at that age where they'll get out there and they'll just, and it's usually always, in our area, it's that first frost, typically the first week in October. But that first frost, hard freeze frost, they start to come out and say, all right, because you don't even know if they're still alive at that point, because you don't see them. You don't even see them during the summer. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden they just come out and they show up and they just, here I am. You know what I mean? And the does are like, oh, there he is. You know what I mean? And so he don't have to go chasing around for nothing. Yep. He's the guy. Now the little guys are running around 3.5, 2.5 stuff. He usually won't pay attention to them, but sometimes if they see that it is a breeding buck that is a bit of a challenge, they will go and start to stake out that territory and push them off. And those bucks don't even challenge them. They just go away. So that's 7.5 and 8.5. And then if they can even get to 8.5 or 9.5, they just own it. They own it all, and they become actually easier to kill as they get at that upper age. And I don't want to say easier because they're super, super smart, but I think you can pattern them because they feel so confident and they take over that area. They will develop a pattern that's very patternable. But you better not screw up, because if you bump them one time and they figure out you are there, it's probably done for the whole season. Yeah. So it's very, very, anyway, that's enough rant for me.
That was a good summary. And just for everybody listening, so that's kind of what we see here. It doesn't mean that that's exactly what happens everywhere, because there's different number of hunters.
Deer travel different in Kansas, look down in Mississippi, and we don't know that. We don't hunt that. And same thing in Texas, but it would be interesting to know and hear more about that. Yeah. But go ahead, JJ, sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back.
Yeah, you've shot more big bucks, I would say, of those upper echelon bucks than anybody sitting in the stable.
For sure.
What do you see common traits of some of these upper echelon deer?
Well, that's while he was going through the whole summary, yeah. I was thinking about something there. I feel like there's two routes to get to a big upper age class buck, and it's like the big sanctuary, the big safe zone. Nobody can hunt them. Whether, like around here, we see that a lot with quarries or landfills or these areas that people can't go or hunt.
Or a doctor, areas. Yeah, residential. That's true. That's 100% on.
Some thick stuff toward, city limits, or just something like that where they, behind some, a business site, or it's just this overlooked spot that nobody can really hunt. Everybody's kind of on the outside looking in. I feel like that's what grows really big deer around here. And then there's also the concept of just management, where people are working together. They're passing the deer to get there because everybody has opportunities to shoot these deer. So, do you shoot this one? You want to pass this one? You're talking to your neighbor. Don't pass, don't shoot the one with the kicker or whatever it may be. But I feel like those two they're like different lanes. So the one where there's this big sanctuary or safe zone where this buck can grow old, there's maybe one giant buck that does that. Whereas the highly managed stuff, I feel like there's a lot more deer in general. You see a lot more 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, but I feel like you don't quite see that 7, 8-year-old because so many people are hunting and passing that when the deer gets to 4 and 5, it's like pretty high chance that they get shot. So there's kind of like 2 routes to get there. I feel like the better route to get a really old buck is that kind of overlooked or spot that nobody can hunt, because I feel like the highly managed, where everybody's working together,
more pressured areas grow bigger bucks.
Get
maybe
shot, I feel like.
Are you saying more pressured areas create that smarter, bigger buck that finds that sanctuary? Because I think you're kind of on a track here that's clicked in my head now, because the deer that we're managing and they have their sanctuaries in our area, they become so comfortable there. They have no danger there for the most part at all. And so it's like, oh yeah, I can just live here safe. It's different behavior than if you get a buck that's being chased his whole life and pressured and finds a sanctuary. That's a little bit different. That's a heck of a point that I hadn't really.
Also wonder too, if there's like one giant buck, if there's better chance of him making it. Seems like they can kind of hide and the does kind of come to them and they find that little soft spot, safe zone. Feel like there's just these giants that show up where there's not a bunch of 3 and 4-year-olds running around. There's just like a big one. I don't know. That's just what kind of I see around here, or my mind kind of tells me, but maybe it's different. Different.
I want to know why he never shared that with me ever.
He's got to keep some.
That's why he's shooting all the big ones.
I think to your point, I think, with people that are managing deer, I think we've become more efficient as hunters, better hunters, understand things more. We have more tools available, whether it's weapon-wise, intel-wise, reveal cameras, micro food plot systems, all of these things, I think, and you're right. Perfect example, the deer I shot in Minnesota this year, he was 5.5, and it was like, and we had passed him. We had that plan. Like, okay, everybody passed him at 3, and he wasn't anything spectacular at 3. 4, he blew up. He looked huge. We made a decision. We're all going to pass him. Gets to 5 now. 5 now, he's a mega giant, and it's like, okay, we're going to kill him, right?
Everybody wants to kill him.
Everybody wants to kill him. And, we're using these tools. We're getting the intel. We have our food plot systems out. So went in there and killed him. Now, his chances, I think, were not great of making it through this year because everybody had their sights set on him. We knew he was 5.5 this year. Okay, this is the year. That deer's chances of making it to that 6, 7, 8-year range, not very good with all the tools and all the intel and everything we have. So I think that you're exactly right on these, and that's kind of the point of this whole podcast is what does it take to get a deer of that, and at what point do you take him? So there's a lot of patience to get a deer from 3 to 4 to 5. If you're watching that deer, man, it takes, I don't know that I have it, but there's people out there that will pass that deer, a 180-inch deer, to get him to hopefully 200 if he doesn't die, if he doesn't get injured and throw weird, the ability, and I think that's such a huge part of this whole conversation is what does it take to get on a deer and strategize killing a deer like that? But what does it take mentally as a hunter to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to shoot him at 4.5, or I'm not going to shoot him at 5.5, or, if that's your target buck, when he gets there, say, okay, I'm not going to shoot this other 5.5-year-old because this is my target. I think that mental game as hunters is kind of brutal. It's exciting, but it's not an easy thing to do when you have just one target buck.
It's super frustrating too if you go through all them years. So look at what you're saying, okay? So you've tracked that deer for 3.5 years when he's 5.5, because at 2.5 he starts to gain your attention. That thing's not a bad deer. He could turn out to be something. Let's see where he goes. So now you start to pay attention. What's he doing at 3.5? What's he doing at 4.5? You got this intel, and and you understand this deer, and he's got this behavior, and he hasn't been pressured because you're leaving him alone. Even if he did encounter you at a younger age and he didn't process it as danger because he's never been in danger, You know what I'm saying? It's going to be a little bit more efficient to kill that deer too. Now, you really, something sparked into my head when you were talking about all that. If you're looking at this management systems, okay, like we're talking about right now, and we do a lot of that now, but we've done both. So people know we've only been managing a property to shoot deer for what? This our 5th year or 6th year? That's it. The 20 years before that has all been high pressured. Hey, do you mind if I hunt? And, and I coached your kid in hockey, and yeah, come on out, Mike. We know who you are. And that's how we hunted our deer. That, it's not quite public land, but it darn sure is close to public land because everybody and their brother and their uncle, and we're hunting around people. So that's how we learned how to shoot, deer. And then JJ, anyway, so there's the two types. So if we go back to the manage piece, it's about how much asset do you have access to in Minnesota. You look at down in Iowa, and we've watched some of these big, huge farms down there, and we know the ones we're talking about with, some people that you would know too, but they're big, huge farms, and they started managing these big tracts of thousands of acres, okay? If I had thousands of acres, I feel I could grow a 200-inch buck. And I guarantee you at my age now, I would absolutely be passing up 5.5 and 6.5-year-old deer if I knew they had the potential to score higher. I'm going to take out, and we do that now, I'm going to take out a crappy 4.5 that's injured or whatever that I know is going nowhere, or 5.5. I will take those deer out without a question and want to actually get them off the property. I'll just take them out. It's not a big deal. I enjoy, hunting deer, and I enjoy, taking deer. But if I had that big property where I didn't have to worry about the neighbors shooting it, and I could hold 2 or 3 or even 4 giant 6.5 to 8.5-year-old deer, and they could coexist, that's a different world now again. Mm-hmm. And I think people don't really think of it that way, but they're understanding once they get a piece of property, and they're like, oh, if I just add on a little more, if I get a little bit bigger, and then this neighbor can't get that, and then, and I think that starts to go to that default. So I guess hunting asset is huge on, understanding, and I'm going to have to just say that it's going to contribute to the success of taking huge, large deer, because you're going to be able to have more target bucks on one property. We're with 240 acre, or no, what do we got here? 200 acres? Mm-hmm. Here, they're roaming other properties, but we're hanging at about usually 2 to 3 a year of target bucks. And they're not all staying on the one property because they can't coexist so much. Unless they're in the same bachelor group, they'll establish territories and not try and push the other one way off.
So taking that and then circling back, JJ, I want to kind of circle back with you here. Other common things or strategies that you've seen in these, target bucks that you've chased, like what are the things that you've seen time and time again that, they all kind of have in common or they've done?
Yeah, I think it's really what they've done is always different. Every buck I've shot, every buck I'm sure you've shot, you shoot them at different times of the year, right? So like when you were down in Iowa hunting this buck, I remember I texted you, are you in the A spot? Like, are you in the spot to kill it? Like, that's important too for targeting big bucks. It's like, we've been hunting deer this year where we're like not in the A spot. We're probably in like the D spot, F spot,
Z.
We're in Z. I don't know if we even got a shot sometimes, but that makes a big difference on success too. Like, are you going to be where that deer is killable? I don't know exactly what your situation was with this buck, but you said you were in the A spot, and I was like, well, Brian's got a pretty dang good shot. So yeah, I've had, I think like I'll go through some bucks Beamer. I think I was in the A spot. Like he showed up during pre-rut. That was my buck to either shoot or, that was my buck to lose essentially, right? Curly, I don't know if we were not in the A spot with Curly, but it came late season, so that's a totally different factor. Like maybe you got food that pulls these deer in from all these sanctuaries or safe spot. That's a tactic that you could implement on a really big deer. I think we've always talked about early season, late season being the best time to shoot monster bucks. Well, then you shoot your two big bucks.
I'll just add that I just want to say to Curly, because Curly is not a managed deer. He wasn't on a managed property. Curly, we
Came from a safe zone.
identified a weakness that he had, and that was and then you took the other elements. Maybe you want to walk through. You know what I'm saying there? You knew that was his weak spot because we documented it. That's his only weak spot that we knew of. The year before, that guy didn't even show up. We thought he was dead. And he showed up twice that year, but we knew where his weak spot was. And the weather had a big impact on that, like JJ was saying about the food. Why don't you tell it? You killed the deer. You're the one
Where was I at before that?
Well, we were talking about deer that,
Oh, just the seasonality of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like late season you can really pull in some big mature bucks too. And that buck would just, he showed up. That was kind of the start of cell cams. Got a couple cell camera pictures, some sightings, and then just went in to a nice pinch point fence gap and took advantage of it on a warm front after a cold front.
And we're talking about 30 below wind chill to like 20 something, or maybe even a little bit warmer than that. And we knew that because deer, they hunker down, and we knew that he would need to go to the food, and we knew about this pinch point, and that was the only time he would, this was just our chance during a daylight, and it's right at the very end, or right at the edge of daylight, that he would go through this one gap in this one spot, and it was just that one window, and that was his weak spot that was identified, and it happened. The odds were, who knows?
Yeah, there's always some luck. That's for sure.
Definitely. Yeah.
And then capitalizing on the luck.
Go ahead.
I forget what I was kind of going on the food thing, the early season, late season, pulling bucks in. Because you can pull them in off those big safe zone sanctuaries too if you got the right food.
And that would have been Curly, so we were there, and then now you can move back to what you were going to say.
Yeah, and then there's always the, like Beamer. I had a chance to shoot him when he was 5. If I would have done that, well, then that story's over, right? So it's like you look at, there's always that question too, like when should you shoot, when should you not shoot, what's the end goal?
Yeah.
Neighbor missed him. There's so many things. Like for a buck to get this big, they got through the gauntlet. There's no question about it. Whether they were in a huge sanctuary or not, they slipped through the cracks somewhere.
Here's what I'm gonna say, and I'll use this year as an example. But like, common strategy on this deer, the one I shot in Minnesota, 100%. I won't say 100%, but so much of that is based on intel, and then strategizing based on that intel. So like, in Minnesota, we run a lot of reveal cameras. That deer was kind of all over the place, and I understood what he did the 2 years before that. But, during that late October time, mid-October time, he started moving back into that core range, and I knew that because of cameras. Now, I wasn't getting pictures of him every day, and I never had a picture of him where I ended up killing him. But I had intel around there that made me understand that, look, this deer is becoming killable. He's starting to move during the daylight, and he's in this area, and I was picking the right window, going with a gut, kind of getting in there where I knew I had the wind and some different things, but it was intel based. This deer, what I can tell you is this was a big farm that I was hunting on. This deer was going to, a week before this deer was going to a standing bean field, and he was doing it pretty regular. And like, those guys had put the work in. They were running a bunch of cameras. They were getting pictures of him daily, had a blind set up. Like, this was where I was going to kill this deer or maybe have an opportunity at him. 3 days before I got down there, this deer completely transitioned to the south side of the farm. So like you talk about that A spot changed in a hurry. He moved to the south end of the farm. It was mild weather. I don't think that rut was tailing off. There was a lot of pictures of him midday, and I think there was, a doe in there. I think he was probably with a doe or a hot doe, whatever it was, and he was going to that food. Weather was cold. Weather turned mild. He shrunk back down to the south side of the farm. There was way more cover down there. If we would have continued hunting that deer on the food, I I would almost bet that we would have never seen him. He might have been there at night in the dark. We transitioned to that south side where he was traveling in this corridor where he had cover, and killed him on the second night, half an hour before dark or 45 minutes before dark. But it was understanding that intel. I feel like with these big bucks, and this is the key. And I feel like I say it every year because it's just how I hunt. I'm not saying don't go out there and just hunt, but like I scout way more than I hunt.
Oh,
I feel like with these big deer, it's so crucial. I know Adam Hayes used to say it back in the day, like when you go in there, like when I go in after a target buck, I legitimately think that I have a chance to kill him if I'm going to dive in there and hunt, because you only have limited chances. And if you mess up on a deer like these, like you are not going to see him. And I'm not saying you won't see him for the rest of the year, but you are going to change what he's doing for, might be a day, might be 5 days, might be 5 weeks. So use your intel. You have these tools now, and I don't care. You can do all this work in the off season, and I recommend doing that. But when it comes down to it in the season, it's like use that intel, scout, and when you go in there, you got to be so surgical about it and know that the odds are just tipped in your favor, even if it's a little bit. So like deer in Minnesota, I shot, I think, on the third sit maybe. This deer is shot on obviously the second sit, but it's like picking those windows, scouting more than you hunt, paying attention to that intel. And when you go in there, make sure that game plan is as sound as it can be. And I think that's a key. You can't just, with these big older bucks, like you can't just go and hunt them and hunt them and hunt them and hunt them, because they're smarter than that.
smart. You got something before I go off?
Unless you're bulletproof. I didn't. I forgot. Well, part of that too is like being able to hunt when that window is open or when that opportunity presents itself. But if you're busy, or if, like, I'm just thinking about this buck I'm trying to hunt in Wisconsin.
Weather,
I wish I could be there
wind
tonight.
direction.
Like, I feel like tonight's the night I'm not going to be there. So it's hard to have time sometimes, and everybody's busy. People got to work, they can all have weekends. So that's a big factor on if you can get the job done too. But all the intel from the past, we've always had intel on all the big bucks we chased for multiple years. I think I was texting someone a couple weeks ago, like, I don't think I've ever seen a giant deer or shot a giant deer that I didn't know about.
Absolutely.
Somebody was talking, neighbor knew about him.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we have years of history or pictures, but about it.
We know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen, I've never seen like, there's a 200 incher here. Oh, he just showed up and now I'm going to go hunt. Like, I've never had that happen.
But, at me growing up, that's all we had. No such thing as a cell camera.
Right.
I mean, I'm dating myself. And so we would read these magazine articles about this big 200-inch buck that some guy shot, and you couldn't sleep at night. And you would sit in that stand all day fantasizing about this giant deer showing up out of nowhere. That's just the way it was. It was always that way. And there's still people that think that way and hunt that way. And we're not saying there's anything wrong with that. But, from a experience perspective, that's not reasonable.
Right.
And so I'm going to get more detailed. So now, you said a lot about, my brain started racing again, which is not good. But what I'm hearing from all of us here is you have to have the sanctuary of some sort. Have you ever gone into your property when you knew that this big target buck was there and walked in and looked where his rub lines are? Oh, his rub lines are there. Oh, this is probably where he's bedding. Have you ever done that?
No.
Never. And why is that? It's because if you do that, and he don't even have to see you, all he has to do is know that dude was there because I walked in and put a camera on his bedding. Dumbest thing you can do. Well, I shouldn't say dumbest thing. I'd just say,
unless you're going to go kill him right then, because
I was going to get to that. So the worst thing you can do is to give up that sanctuary area. Okay. So now we're being extremely disciplined. Okay. We're allowing that deer to be on the place where we hunt. And if that's the first core thing, if you can't do that, then this strategy won't work for you, because you're either hunting a transition zone or you're just not allowing, or you don't have the the asset for a big deer to be there. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, just understand what you got working for you. Understand what your assets are. Understand what you can do to get that big deer. And that's one of the most important things is you got to be able to let that deer be there at some level or make him feel comfortable transitioning through there. And it's the same thing. Even if he's not living there, if you don't allow him to transition through there without him knowing there's people there hunting him, you're not going to see him. He's not going to be on your property. And if he is, you're going to get one night picture, you're going to go berserk about it, and he never shows again, and you're going to be frustrated. Well, that's because of what you did, okay? And I'm not saying that's bad, okay? We probably don't do enough of it. And I think our deer are getting too relaxed. And I think there's too many does there. I think we need to kill more deer. We need to get them a little bit sharper, you know what I mean, and make them think that.
Spook them a bunch.
Well, not so much, but you know what I mean. At the earlier ages is what I'm getting at, not when they're already 6.5, 7.5 years old, you know. But at the earlier ages, get them a little smarter by letting them know there's something more there. Anyway, so you got that sanctuary piece, and you got the next piece. Window of opportunity. How are you understanding your windows of opportunity? You made the point that, you know, you can't go hunt that deer day after day after day in that same stand. I'm telling you, people, they will figure you out. You got to make sure you have the right wind. You got to make sure that your scent control is so spot on. And I mean, I'm talking hardcore stuff. Oh, it's no big deal. You know, if you got a dog, nothing against dogs. If you got a dog, you can't have your dog running around in your truck and hair and smells going on your clothes without the deer understanding that there's something else there besides a deer. You got to be, you know, put it in tubs, let it sit outside. If you can't go get gas, you can't go to McDonald's with your hunting clothes on. You can't do stuff like that. You got to make sure you clean them boots off. You got to make sure you're doing this. You got to make sure you go into that stand quietly if you can. And guys like me that can't hear, that's hard, by the way. And there's just all these things you have to do. Your gear has to be clean. You have to be super clean. And you can't go in there. You got to understand where that deer is coming from. This big deer. So I'd say one thing, and JJ's identified it numerous times after he shot his big deer. He knew where that deer was, a high chance of where that deer was that particular day that he picked to hunt it. Okay, I do it too. I kind of know where that deer is because I saw night intel. Got a good idea where he's going to be based off of older, intel and getting intel of his behavior and then seeing the intel in real and seeing that hunting window. I got the right wind. I got the moon. I got the barometer. All those things go into play, and that's why when you say you don't hunt, I don't hunt that much, but I'm hunting all the time. You know, I'm making sure there's water out there when I get a chance. I'm making sure things are, that's part of hunting, making sure that the stands are right, doing little tweaks, studying that deer, finding that window. When that all lines up, boom, I'm out there, but I can't bump that deer. I can't spook that deer. I might not be able to hunt him in the morning in certain spots because I know I'm going to bump him. That would be the worst thing you could do. So now you know he's been showing up in the morning, but you can't hunt him that morning because you'll kick him out of there. It's just all these little tiny details that we're talking about. Then you got to understand, what is their window of killability, like we talked about with Curly. That deer that we saw him in real life one time, he disappeared an entire year, came back, got camera intel maybe 2 or 3 times. We were elated that he showed back up. We thought he was dead. In fact, we saw a deer that the guy killed that looked very similar to him. We thought, there's him. He's done. And then he shows up on camera like, oh my God. And we knew that was his weak spot. And then the window lined up, but the weather was perfect, but the wind was just on the edge. Now, if you're as anal as we are about your scent control and you're as good as we are with our scent control, and I'm not trying to be arrogant about it, but we get deer downwind of us. Not by, planning, but it happens. We get away with it. So, and Curly was a great example of that. So he killed that deer. So, sanctuary, behavior, don't bump that deer. understand his behavior, his weaknesses, try and identify weaknesses. And it's going to change, like you said, from different, it'll be food, it'll be does, it's going to be late season survival. You need to understand all these things. And to be honest with you, we're sharing that information on our platform. We really are. Now my brain is getting a little bit too busy, so I'm going to back out of here. I know there's a lot more than that, but go ahead if you know more detailed tips.
Well, I think every buck's different too. And then one thing, Bryan said, don't overhunt or just, first time. Obviously, first time in is always the best, but sometimes there are some deer where if you get some bulletproof access, can get in and out. You're not diving into bedding or, you're smart about it. You can hunt that deer more often and kind of grind it out a little bit more. But every situation is different. Like every property is different. Access is different. Behavior is different. Where the bucks are bedding is different. So you kind of got to just use the information you got and use your mind. Obviously, schedules are different. You can't always hunt during the best barometric pressures and cold fronts if you got a busy work schedule. So just kind of got to roll with it and do your best. But each buck's different. And that's what I love about target bucks is they are all different. Like, I don't even look at it like, this buck scored this and this buck scored that and that one's like, I don't know. They're all just so unique and different. Like the buck I'm hunting right now, limping around, 2 bad legs. Like that's a completely different hunt. Like I like that. Like I actually kind of enjoy watching that and trying to figure it out. He moves slow. You see him walk. It takes him 20 minutes to go from, spot A to spot B. So how do you hunt that deer? Something a little bit different. So it's every target buck's different. They all survive their own way in their own safe spot. They all figured out their own way. So I think the big game, the big prize is trying to figure out what that is and capitalizing on that.
Yeah, now you gave that deer the win the first window you had to go shoot him, which he goes, oh, should I do it? Should I go? I go, you know what? Go for it. It's late season. This guy's all beat up. It's like, not like he's a 200-inch deer. Go for it. You're there. It's your opportunity. So, and I said, stay away. Don't do it. I'm being super cautious. But when that time is right, you can go. If you got to go right in next to their bedding, do it. But understand, this is your window. You're going for it. Do everything you can not to blow him out of there. But that's a great way to kill that deer too, But
or spook him.
It's it's exactly.
Well, I like your odds, and we're going to wrap this up here because I know some meetings got going on. I want to maybe continue this podcast at some point too and do maybe a continuation because I think there's a lot of different aspects we can talk about. I like your chances on that Wisconsin buck. If it were me, I'm excited just hearing you talk about it. We're in that late season time now where we don't have super cold weather though. That would help. But that deer, he's a little injured. He's going to these food sources, going to prime time. He's going to beans. He might do it tonight, but it's not like he's going to go and do something completely different. He's moved in there now. He feels comfortable. He'll probably keep doing that here for the next. So you're going to have this window again. I'd be really happy if he showed up on camera on the prime time tonight. God, that is a validation in my mind that okay, he's doing that. Where's that next window that I can now jump in there? So I like your chances there. But I think, we've talked about a lot of things. Intel's a great one. Patience, I think mentally, physically, as much patience as you can have when you're hunting a target deer. Wait for them to do the right thing. The killability thing that's what's crucial. And there's lots of big deer out there. Killing them is not easy. And the hardest part about it is being patient. It's a chess match. There's so many variables. But if you can be patient and then have a little luck, that's where, maybe end up having dream season.
And you never know. A 220 might walk in that you didn't know existed.
Never know. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. Download the free Deer Society app. Tons of instructionals, information, hunt breakdowns out there. Still a few more hunt breakdowns coming. So good luck if you still got a tag out there. Thanks for tuning in. And hopefully we're going to continue maybe part 2 of this podcast coming up here in the coming weeks. So thanks for listening. Good luck.
All our sponsors here at Deer Society are partners
whose equipment we know we can trust are going to make you more successful and have a better experience in the field. Products like Illusion Systems, maker of the Black Rack, the Extinguisher, and the Phase Body Odor System. Tacticam, Reveal Cell Cameras, 10-Point Crossbows, Onyx Maps, Osseo Gear, Huiman, and Big Frig.